This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. We begin today's show in Lebanon, where Israel's attacked more than 300 sites today, and fears of a broader regional war are growing. Al Jazeera and other media outlets report 100 people were killed in the wave of strikes today, 400 more wounded, as the Israeli army steps up pressure on Hezbollah. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres told CNN he feared, quote, the possibility of transforming Lebanon into another Gaza. Earlier today, Israel instructed residents of southern Lebanon to leave their homes if they live near any site used by Hezbollah. Israel sent text messages, made phone calls to tens of thousands of people in what Lebanese officials decried as a form of psychological warfare. This is a Lebanese shopkeeper in Beirut.
I say this is the beginning of the war, definitely the beginning of a war.
This comes after Israel killed at least 45 people Friday in a massive airstrike on a densely populated residential neighborhood of Beirut. The dead include 16 members of Hezbollah, including 2 senior commanders, Ibrahim Akil and Ahmed Wahbi. Lebanon's transportation minister, Ali Hamia, condemned the Israeli attacks.
The
Israeli enemy, with all its continued crimes, with the excuse of pursuing Hezbollah, has targeted a residential compound. It has committed a massacre to a residential building against unarmed children, women at their homes. The Israeli enemy is taking the region to war.
Hezbollah responded by firing a barrage of rockets into Israel, targeting an airbase and weapons factories. Meanwhile, former CIA director, former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has accused Israel of terrorism for rigging thousands of walkie-talkies and pagers to explode in a coordinated attack last week that killed at least 37 people, injuring thousands more in Lebanon. Panetta spoke to CBS News.
I don't think there's any question that it's a form of terrorism. This has gone right into the supply chain, right into the supply chain. And when you have terror going into the supply chain, it makes people ask the question, what the hell is next?
For more, we go to Beirut, Lebanon, where we're joined by 2 guests. Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah is a British Palestinian reconstructive surgeon who arrived in Beirut last week to treat some of the thousands of people injured when pagers and walkie-talkies exploded. He's also worked in Gaza with Doctors Without Borders. Also with us in Beirut is Sintia Issa, editor-at-large at The Public Source, a Beirut-based independent media organization. We're going to go to Sintia first. Can you describe the latest in Lebanon? This morning's attacks that we hear killed, 100 people, injuring hundreds more, and then make your way back through the weekend.
Thank you for having me, Amy. This morning, between 6 and 7 a.m., as most people were still sleeping, Israel began its largest bombardment campaign of the year in South Lebanon, and then gradually it made its way to the Bekaa, reaching all the way north of the Bekaa to the Hermel. That's about 200 kilometers far from the border. These are locations that were not targeted up until this point in the war. And in fact, this is very reminiscent of 2006. We're talking about 100 locations or so, 50 or 100 locations or so between villages, towns, and various parts of the landscape. Jbeil district, which is not really involved at all in this war, was also targeted. This is also part of the psychological warfare that we are seeing. And the bombing itself, we saw plumes that were not necessarily the most familiar. So we're talking about bombs that may have been added to the arsenal for the first time here in Lebanon, or at least used in Lebanon for the first time. The scale is incomparable so far. Later in the afternoon, at around noon, we had maybe another 100 or 200 strikes in different locations. As you did mention, it seems like there's 100 people who were killed already, and several hundred more definitely wounded and injured. Sites near hospitals were targeted, in a clear indication that what has happened in Gaza may be coming to Lebanon as well. In relation to this as well, Southerners, but also different people reaching Beirut, but mostly in the south, received text messages telling them to leave their homes if their homes contains a missile or a rocket. Israel also infiltrated the landline network in Sur in the south and called people and told them to leave if their house contains rockets or if they're close to any weapons. There's also a series of videos that Israel has been circulating on social media platforms for propagandistic purposes. These are animations where you can clearly see homes, and inside these homes there are rockets lying there, and the same message is basically telling residents of Lebanon to leave if their homes contains rockets. So what we're seeing here is an attempt to manufacture consent for a carpet bombing campaign that will no doubt, perhaps, let's see how far it goes, but it promises at least to resemble a little bit what we're seeing in Gaza.
So how do people know if they're near some kind of Hezbollah site?
There is a conflation that's essentially happening with Southerners in Lebanon. There's a conflation between all civilians and Hezbollah happening at the same time. There is, if the question is, where is Israel attacking right now? It's been fairly indiscriminate. We've seen that, cities and towns, including the heart of Nabatiyeh, was bombed. So the Ghaziyeh next to Saida, also the square was bombed. So we're talking about attacks that are happening in the thick of the towns, densely populated areas, not just in disparate places. And at the heart of this is an attempt to manufacture consent and kind of try to portray most Southernese as Hezbollah operatives, their homes as essentially depots and caches.
Hezbollah's deputy leader, Naim Qassem, spoke at the funeral of Ibrahim Akil, killed in Friday's Israeli airstrike on a residential building in Beirut.
The Lebanese support front for Gaza will continue, no matter how long it takes until the war on Gaza ends. Secondly, the people of the north won't return. Rather, displacement will increase and support will expand. The Israeli military solution only deepens Israel's dilemma and that of the northern population without solving their problems. So go to Gaza and stop the war.
So if you could comment on what he was saying. And also, I wanted to go to White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby, who told ABC's This Week the U.S. has been engaged in, quote, extensive and quite assertive diplomacy.
We don't believe that a military conflict, and we're saying this directly to our Israeli counterparts, George, we don't believe that escalating this military conflict is in their best interest. We want to make sure that we can continue to do everything we can to try to prevent this from becoming an all-out war there with Hezbollah across that Lebanese border.
Sintia Issa, if you could comment.
Well, to be very clear, Hezbollah never intended to have a full-on war on Lebanon. That was not a part of their calculation or strategy at all, actually. They were very much interested in and intent on being a front of support and military solidarity to Gaza in the context of a genocide and ethnic cleansing. But Hezbollah never really wanted to have a full-fledged war. This is something that they stated themselves, and if we actually follow the facts on the ground, the actions, we will notice that they try to work within the rules of engagement, target only military infrastructures and never civilian infrastructures, and that was always the intent. It was always Israel that wants to escalate this into a broader war with Lebanon. And for an entire year, Hezbollah has been trying to de-escalate. Now, with what happened on Tuesday and Wednesday, with about 3,000 people maimed in Dahye in the span of seconds, and then another assassination on Friday that took the lives of 54 people, injuring many more. It seems like war is forced upon Hezbollah. And if war is forced upon Hezbollah, then they will do it, and it will be a fierce battle, and it will be a costly battle for both sides. Now, when it comes to the United States and John Kirby saying that, the U.S. is very much trying to work for a ceasefire, again, if we actually try to compare the statements with actions on the grounds, there's large inconsistencies there, and the Lebanese people and the Palestinians and everyone in the region very much recognizes that the U.S. is not, in fact, trying to work on a ceasefire in real terms. In fact, the U.S. is quite complicit in what is happening in Gaza and now in this coming war on Lebanon. It supplies Israel with 60% of the weapons it's using in Lebanon, in Palestine, but also in Syria. It's giving it diplomatic immunity in various UN Security Councils. And at the ICC, it's basically stopping any incrimination of Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu of war crimes and plausible genocide. So the US has been playing a very important role in this war from the very get-go. And of course, this question of peace process, one remembers this question of ceasefire process, one remembers the peace process and the question of peace process. This question of process is really a ploy to extend the possibilities of capitulation, the possibilities of, in this case here, genocide in Palestine, and increase the war on Lebanon. But the reality is just a ploy that's presented to give more time to Israel to do more. Unfortunately, that's the situation. Of course, the war is maybe a fait accompli or not. I think the war can come to an end, and there is a way out of this war. There is a roadmap. First, if the U.S. is indeed, interested in reaching a ceasefire, it would halt all arms supply to Israel right now. The 60% it supplies. And, since the U.S. does sanction about 30% of the countries in the world, then in that case, it should be able to sanction Israel for committing wars, crimes against humanity, and a genocide. And then finally, it would lift all diplomatic and legal impunity for Israel at the ICC, for example. So there is a road forward to end the war, and that's to be sure.
I wanted to bring Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah into the conversation. You came to Lebanon last week. Interesting to hear the former CIA director, former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta talking about the explosions of the pagers and the walkie-talkies as being a terrorist act. Can you talk about the effects on the ground and the kind of injuries you're seeing with, I think at last count, 37 dead, thousands injured?
This is the largest act of mass mutilation we've seen, even more than in the civil war in Sierra Leone, where warring parties were chopping each other's hands. This is the explosive put in the pager was sufficient to maim and not to kill. And so what you have is over 3,000, with around 90% who have penetrating injuries to the eyes, some of whom both eyes, and a blast injury to the hand with what we refer to in hand surgery as a mangled hand. Because what happened is the pager went off, the victims picked up the pager and then looked at it, and it exploded in their hand facing their faces. And so they're also facial injuries. Now, the act of booby-trapping these pagers meant that they went off when people were in their cars with families, when they were in their homes with kids picking up these pagers to when they went off. And so truly, the aim of this was to mutilate. And I tell my colleagues here that it's reminiscent of the marches of return between 2018 and 2020, when Israel intentionally shot over 8,000 Palestinians in the lower limb with the aim of disablement and mutilation. And so this is an act that was designed at inflicting disablement, mutilation of the victims.
You know, it's interesting you talk about the seconds delay, that it's almost like a double tap bomb on a much smaller level, right? When a country bombs another country, and then as the rescue workers come running to help the people on the ground, they're bombed again. In this case, it was a pager, and so first it vibrates, forcing people, well, people instinctively then pick up or go over across the room to where it might not have hurt them, and then as they pick it up, they are injured or killed.
And also what happened the following day is that the walkie-talkies that had also been booby-trapped went off. And these walkie-talkies were being used by paramedics, by ambulance staff, by civil defense staff. And so there was a kind of second wave of similarly, but with bigger explosive quantities in with the same aim of inducing that terrible injury, paralyzing the health system, and leaving these people with permanent disability.
On Friday, you were operating on victims of the pager and walkie-talkie attacks when Israel bombed the residential building in Beirut?
Yes. And I mean, that was our biggest worry, is that it highlighted the fact that as a result of around 3,000 wounded in the hospitals, there wasn't any capacity left in the health system to take any of the wounded. And that's what forced a lot of the hospitals to push for early discharge of the wounded over the weekend, because we felt that the health system was very exposed with all of these injured people in the beds, and we felt that there's going to be another wave. And unfortunately, this came true this morning, that we needed to discharge a lot of the wounded early. Well, you need to realize this comes at the at the end of a 4-year economic crisis that has really disabled the Lebanese health system and disabled the Lebanese government in terms of its ability to support the Ministry of Health. So you have around a third of the doctors and nurses emigrated as a result of the collapse of the Lebanese currency. And you have a health system that's mainly made up of small and medium-sized private institutions that just don't have the purchasing capacity to buy the kind of medication, consumables that they need. And those who did, it was used up on Tuesday treating, and since then treating the 3,000 wounded.
You worked for weeks in Gaza, treating the wounded, the injured there. How does what you're seeing here in Beirut compare? You told the New York Times the Lebanese health system is in no way able to treat war wounded. If it were to escalate into a full-blown war, we're stuck in this loop. You just operate and operate. You feel like you're playing catch-up all the time, Dr. Abu-Sittah.
So when we had these 3,000 wounded, all within a couple of hours of each other, they flooded the health system, which then meant that they were being taken to the operating room. Really, I mean, this is the biggest hospital in Lebanon, the American University of Beirut Medical Center. And we had 10 rooms going all the time. We were doing around 50 to 60 cases per day. And it took us from Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, till Saturday to finish the majority of the initial surgeries. I mean, these patients, especially for their hand reconstruction, will need between 5 and 12 surgeries over the next 5 years to regain some hand function, to try to limit the disability that's left. The eyes, that's the even more devastating thing. The eyes, the loss of vision as a result of these injuries. That's going to leave permanent disability. This is an act of kind of almost mythical mutilation. It's an act of mutilation, it was not an assassination attempt, but an act of mass mutilation.
Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah, we want to thank you for being with us. My final question is, you moved to Beirut in 2011, joined the faculty of the American University of Beirut Hospital. Your mother was born in Lebanon. Why did you choose to go back?
On Tuesday, I realized when I was in London, I had been in Glasgow as the rector, speaking at the opening ceremony of the academic year, and then went back to London. And as the news came about on Tuesday morning and Tuesday afternoon, I realized the sheer number and the type of injuries would require reconstructive surgery. And so that was the decision. I took an overnight flight from London on Tuesday night and got here at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning and came straight to the hospital. And we have literally been operating since then. We're now trying to clear the hospital with the news of over 500 now wounded in the south. And we're expecting these wounded, some of whom to come here, the most critically wounded. The Israelis have been targeting cars on the roads full of fleeing families. And so we need, I think the most important thing is that the humanitarian sector needs to realize that the Lebanese health system now needs help. Before the Israelis bomb the airport, it needs trauma teams to be brought in. It needs them to be fully equipped and fully funded in terms of consumables and medication, because the system is not going to be able to deal with this.
I want to thank you for being with us, Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah, British Palestinian surgeon, speaking to us from Beirut, and Sintia Issa, editor-at-large at The Public Source, also in Beirut, Lebanon. Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.